So last year, how many interactions did you have with Russian government official Sergei Kislyak? I just need a number. Is it 3?
Well, of all foreign officials or just?
Russian government official, Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, last year, how many interactions did you have with him?
I spoke at the Republican convention. I came off the platform and people were there and we chatted a moment, had an encounter. Couple months later, I believe in September, he asked for a meeting and I provided that. I met with over approximately 25 ambassadors last year, and I had that same day as, well, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. Thank you.
Well,
as Attorney General, you have a security clearance, correct?
Yes.
And to get that security clearance, you submitted a security clearance application, also known as an SF-86 form, correct?
That's correct.
I submitted such a form when I served on active duty in the U.S. Air Force. And the form requires you to certify under penalty of perjury that the information submitted was true, complete, and correct to the best of your knowledge. You certified your security clearance form, correct?
That is correct.
I'm going to, on the video screen, show you a question from that form. And it says, have you or any of your immediate family in the past 7 years had any contact with a foreign government, its establishment, such as embassy, consulate agency, military service, intelligence, or security service, etc., or its representatives, whether inside or outside the U.S.? The answer that you gave was no. What you just told us under oath was exactly the opposite. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Sessions, were you lying then when you filled out the form, or are you lying now?
What I was told by my executive assistant when we did this form earlier, and then again when I was nominated for Attorney General, that the FBI authority says members of Congress and effectively government officials meeting people on an official basis, you were not required to list all these contacts.
Nothing in that question says you get to answer any differently because you're a U.S. Senator rather than, say, a young police officer. Isn't that right?
Well,
nothing in that question authorizes you to answer any differently. Isn't that right?
I would say that nobody at the FBI or any other place, to my knowledge, said you left that blank. Surely you've met with some foreign officials in the last 7 years. I've not had any private business dealings or any things of that nature. My contacts would be in the normal course of
let me ask you
senatorial business.
Let me ask you one of your interactions.
So I thought that was a reasonable answer.
You said under oath today that you had a meeting with Ambassador Kislyak of under an hour. That's pretty long. Was it more than 50 minutes?
I doubt it was 50 minutes, but
45?
it may have been 45, 50 minutes.
All right. Did you discuss campaign-related items such as Ukraine with the ambassador?
Well, that's not campaign related.
All right. I'm going to ask you two simple questions.
Yes, we did talk about Ukraine. We actually had an argument about the Ukraine because the day before, the Ukrainian ambassador was in my office making his case against Russia, and I raised those issues with Mr. Kislyak, and he was, as I referred to it, I think, the classic, we did nothing wrong.
I'm glad you're very animated.
Did everything wrong. That was his
Let me ask you two simple questions, because in a sense you've already answered it. You did have communications with the Russians last year, isn't that right?
Repeat that.
You did have communications with the Russians last year, isn't that right? Just yes or no?
I had a meeting with the Russian ambassador, yes.
Great. That's exactly the opposite answer you gave under oath to U.S. Senate. So again, either you're lying to U.S. Senate or you're lying to U.S. House of Representatives.
Well, that's
the time of the gentleman has expired. The witness can answer any further if he chooses to.
I won't repeat it, Mr. Chairman, but I hope the congressman knows, and I hope all of you know, that my answer to that question, I did not meet with the Russians, was explicitly responding to the shocking suggestion that I, as a surrogate, was meeting on a continuing basis with Russian officials, and the implication was to impact the campaign in some sort of nefarious way. And all I did was meet in my office with the ambassador, which we didn't discuss anything like that. So I just want to say I appreciate the congressman's right. I guess he can say it's free speech. He can't be sued here. So that's just my response, and I'm sorry that that's my response.
Mr. Sessions, I have a copy of the transcript of your testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee in October. You stated under oath, "I don't recall," in some form or fashion 29 times. Is that correct?
I have no idea.
I have a copy of the transcript of your testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee in June. You stated under oath, "I don't recall," in some form or fashion approximately 36 times. Is that correct?
I don't know.
In your testimony today, you have stated, "I don't recall," at least 20 times. Is that fair to say?
I have no idea.
Now, on October 4th, 2016, during a TV interview with Lieu, you criticized Hillary Clinton for telling FBI investigators, "I can't remember," approximately 35 times. You also stated during that Lieu interview that the intentional failure to remember can constitute perjury. Mr. Attorney General, do you still believe that the intentional failure to remember can constitute a criminal act?
If it's an act to deceive, yes.
Okay. Now, you testified in January that you had no contact with Russian operatives during the Trump campaign. Earlier today, you testified that your story has, quote, "never changed." Is that correct? That was your testimony earlier today, that your story has never changed, correct?
I believe that's fair to say.
Okay,
We've added things that I did not recall at the time.
Right.
So my statement at the time was my best recollection of the circumstances, and as things are brought up.
Claiming my time, I understand.
All right.
Sir, you now acknowledge meeting with Ambassador Kislyak during the Republican National Convention, correct?
I remember I made a speech. He came up to me afterwards. I was standing in front of the speaker program and did chat with him.
Okay, thank you. And you also
encounter, not a meeting. It was just an encounter at that time.
Okay, and you also met with the ambassador in September of 2016 in your office, as you've acknowledged, correct?
He asked for an appointment. I had two senior staffers, both full colonels in the United States Army, retired in the meeting with me.
You testified in June before the Senate Intelligence Committee that you had not heard even a whisper about possible Russian involvement in the Trump campaign. Yet we understand that you attended this March 31st meeting where George Papadopoulos talked about potential communications with Russian operatives. But also, according to your third quarter 2016 FEC filing, you hosted a Trump campaign dinner meeting on June 30th, 2016 at the Capitol Hill Club. Is that right?
That's correct, I believe.
And your Senate reelection campaign paid for that meeting. Is that right?
I think that may be so.
Okay. And Carter Page and George Papadopoulos both attended that June 30th meeting, correct?
That has been reported.
And at that meeting, Carter Page told you that he was going to Moscow in a few days. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And he said it was a brief meeting as he was walking out the door. I don't recall that conversation, but I'm not able to dispute it.
Understood. Reclaiming my time, I've got limited time available.
That is not, does that establish some sort of improper contact?
I think you understand.
Russians?
I think you understand.
He's not Russian either. You know.
Understand, sir. I get to ask the questions. You provide the answers in this capacity. You're no longer in the United States Senate. You voted in 1999 to remove Bill Clinton from office on charges of perjury, correct?
That is correct.
And connection.
Well, there were other charges. I voted
Simple
for
question.
impeachment. Yes.
Yes, understand. To remove him, actually, impeachment's in the House. In connection with that vote to remove President Clinton from office, you gave this speech on the Senate floor on February 29th, 1999, and in it, you acknowledged that while serving as U.S. Attorney, you once prosecuted a young police officer who lied in a deposition. And in that speech, you decided to prosecute that young police officer even though he corrected his testimony. Now, you testified under oath before the Senate Judiciary Committee in January. You subsequently corrected that testimony in a March 6 written submission and have been forced repeatedly to come back to the Senate and now the House to clarify. When explaining your vote on the Senate floor to remove Bill Clinton from office, you stated that you refused to hold a president accountable to a different standard than the young police officer who you prosecuted. Let me be clear. The Attorney General of the United States of America should not be held to a different standard than the young police officer whose life you ruined by prosecuting him for perjury. I yield back.
The gentleman may respond if he chooses to.
Mr. Jeffries, nobody, not you or anyone else should be prosecuted, not me, or accused of perjury for answering the question the way I did in this hearing. I've always tried to answer the questions fairly and accurately. But to ask, did you ever do something, do you ever meet with Russians and deal with the campaign? You're saying Mr. Carter Page, who left that meeting, according to the press reports, and I guess his deposition or interview has been reported as saying, I'm going to Russia. I made no response to him, didn't acknowledge it. And you're accusing me of lying about that? I say that's not fair, Mr. Jeffries. I would say that's not fair, colleagues. That's not on any indication that I in any way participated in anything wrong. And the same with Mr. Papadopoulos. He talked about, it's reported in the paper, that he said something about going to Russia and dealing with the Russians, and I pushed back and said you shouldn't do it. So I don't think it's right to accuse me of doing something wrong. I had no participation in any wrongdoing with regard to influence in this campaign improperly.